Norfolk Southern train derailed in East Palestine, Ohio on February 3rd. So it's been a little bit over 2 weeks now or just about 2 weeks since we've seen this derailment. And it's gone from something that I think was pretty quiet and not necessarily a big deal to now national and even international media attention. Mike, let's start with you. We obviously know that this is a fairly dangerous situation in terms of the chemicals that were released and the residents of East Palestine. But what's going on with Norfolk Southern in the intermodal space right now? How is this affecting the operations of the trains?
Well, I think the operations are probably back to normal. I think they've been able to clear the tracks, and after some delays, I think they're now running trains through through that part of the country. I think Rachel laid out pretty well in her article, yesterday that it's probably not going to have a huge shareholder value hit to the stock price of Norfolk Southern and the market cap of Norfolk Southern. And it's still not really clear exactly what happened or who was at fault. And this investigation by the NTSB is going to determine, hopefully, the root cause. But there's a lot of things that could have gone wrong, on the supplier side as well as the railroad. I mean, most of those cars are owned by either leasing companies or shippers. It's not clear. I don't think it was disclosed who owned the car that derailed or whether that rail car was properly maintained. So there really still is a lot to unpack there. But I think for shippers now, I think they can move through that area without being impacted.
And Rachel, we're looking at different scenarios and different reasons. Some folks are starting to say that, hey, this is coming down to precision scheduled PSR really being able to point to all the factors that could have prevented this. Some folks are saying it's not. Are you seeing anything from the public reactions that are saying that this could be a potential cause?
Yeah, so the rail workers that I've been speaking to have definitely pointed to PSR and kind of these maintenance headcount cuts across railroads, especially in the last 10 years, even in the last 3 years. But as Mike mentioned, we are still waiting for the cause of the reaction, or the cause of the accident from the NTSB. It will probably take up to 2 years before we know from the NTSB the full reasons and causes of this collision, of this derailment. But one thing we know right now is that it appears that one potential cause of the derailment was a wheel bearing overheating on one of the cars hauling these hazardous chemicals, and that seeming to spark a failure of that particular car, and then the subsequent derailment of those 5 cars hauling those hazardous chemicals. But yeah, certainly among the workers that I've been speaking to and union leaders I've been speaking to, they are pointing towards these PSR cuts and PSR initiatives as one sort of systemic cause for this derailment.
So, Rachel, Mike mentioned your article yesterday, which contained some analyst reaction in it, but it also contained something that really surprised me, that we could be looking at Norfolk Southern only having to pay about $40 to $50 million in casualty fines for this, right? We're seeing a lot of things come out on social media. Of course, I'm sure most people have seen, the photos of the black cloud from the cleanup of that and them setting those chemicals on fire. We're starting to see some of the downward stream water effects with some water quality issues and water being affected down the Ohio River Basin, which travels all the way down into the Mississippi watershed. We could see these impacts reaching literally down to the Gulf of Mexico. What does that look like on the Norfolk Southern radar? Does it all depend on what the EPA finds and then how they choose to go about finding Norfolk Southern? Or are we looking at them potentially just getting off with paying what I think it was 1.7% of their 2022 profits was what that fine would be?
Yeah, looking at a historical, well, maybe not historical, but a previous derailment in 2005 in Grantville, South Carolina, Norfolk Southern had a derailment there, actually a collision there. And immediately after that collision, 9 people died, and around I believe more than 500 people were admitted to the hospital. And as a result of that incident, we didn't see Norfolk Southern experience a particular hit to their bottom line or their stock price, especially in the long term. It wasn't something that really undercut or undermined their business in any meaningful way. And the fact that this accident has not involved any immediate fatalities or hospital admissions, we can expect that the impact to Norfolk Southern's bottom line would probably be even less than its relatively minimal impact in the 2000s.
And Mike,
I want to jump in here and I want to add, it's not clear to me that Norfolk Southern is at fault. And before you jump all over me, just keep in mind that the rail car that caused the derailment was probably owned by a leasing company. The leasing companies are responsible for some of the maintenance. The shippers are responsible for some of the maintenance as well. There are very specific requirements for how rail cars are loaded. I mean, it's like one of the things NTSB is going to investigate was, were those rail cars, the rail car in question that was derailed, was it properly maintained? Was it loaded correctly? There's very specific load limits for how much weight can be placed in that car and what chemicals are in there. So those are potential, causes, or even just, the hot boxes on the wayside manufacturing. So there's all sorts of issues with suppliers that I'm not, that potentially suppliers or shippers that could have contributed to this. So everyone seems to be pointing the finger at Norfolk Southern. I mean, Norfolk Southern is responsible for maintaining the track, which no one has suggested that the track was wrong, or and the locomotives, and that's not part of the question, and the crews. And not clear to me. I don't think the crew did anything wrong based on things I've seen. So it's just not clear whose fault it is. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense to overly penalize Norfolk Southern until we know what exactly happened.
So, Mike, along that thread there. Sorry, go ahead, Rachel.
Oh, sorry. I just want to say, Mike, you're absolutely right. And it's not something that really has been discussed broadly, is the fact that, Norfolk Southern most likely did not own this car, and the shipper is responsible for maintaining that. So I'm definitely curious to learn when we'll find out who actually is the owner of that car. Sorry, I just want to interject with that.
I think that's super, super important to hit on, of course, because you see Norfolk Southern, it's their train that they're running, and you automatically think they're responsible for every single facet of what's going on that train. But as we're looking at the downstream effects, the residents of East Palestine who are directly affected, and folks who are maybe looking to be affected downstream, not directly affected, they're going to be wanting a place to put the blame. And potentially, that things like this, we'll see lawsuits and we'll see people seeking damages either for health issues or for loss of income for those residents who maybe aren't able to come back to their houses. Where do we see maybe the blame being pointed at if it's not directly at Norfolk Southern? And then how do people looking for damages or reparations get a payout? Are we talking about insurance having to cover this at the end of the day? Or is it something where we just don't know until we know?
I don't think we know yet. I think it'll be all manner of class action lawsuits. I mean, I'm sure everyone who will claim to have had some life-altering sickness as a result of the smoke, rightly or wrongly. So I'm sure it'll be in litigation forever, but don't have any of the specifics I can share.
And Mike, when we're looking at the situation, do you see this as potentially something that could be large enough to spark enough public outrage to have any kind of federal shifts in the entire rail industry? Or do you think, once we do see what the actual cause was, it's going to be kind of irrelevant to make any sweeping changes to Norfolk Southern, even if they weren't at fault here?
Yeah, so certainly I think this could lead to regulatory changes for safety. So you look back at some of these derailments that were really far worse. Chatsworth, California, in 2008, 25 people died. That gave rise to the positive train control. That was a multi-billion-dollar mandate to have a system in place that requires trains to be stopped when there are either hazardous materials or passenger in the event that there is a human error. And so that's something that's now on all trains that in the U.S. that fit that description. 2013, you had the Lock-McGontick disaster, which was also one of the worst ones of all time. Something like 47 or 50 people died, and it sort of destroyed this town. And that gave rise to safety regulations on the tank rail cars, where there had to be additional safety features, was it quick release valves or coils and insulation. I mean, they had to be jacketed, so there had to be head shields to prevent the puncturing of rail cars. So that was a very, major change in the way that rail cars were regulated, designed to prevent something like that, happening again there. I think once we figure out exactly what happened and what the cause was, I think it's likely there'll be an incremental safety regulation to prevent something like this happening again. I can only speculate what that might be. Maybe if the tank cars aren't crash worthy enough, maybe the trains have to go slower through residential areas. That's a possibility. Maybe the tank cars have to be further strengthened to prevent the chemicals getting out of the rail cars, because the issue wasn't so much that the train derailed, it's that the chemicals didn't stay in the rail car. So that's possible too. Maybe the hot box detectors have to be more frequent, or there's some change to how the rail cars are inspected. So you can only sort of speculate, but I think that's really sort of the key question for the industry going forward is, how does this change safety regulations?
Rachel, any thoughts on that as well from you?
Yeah, I think it will be really interesting to see how this reshapes safety regulations going forward. I think one kind of interesting way that this is played out is that, talking about, PSR and these rail companies in general, we the kind of the larger public was already doing that, through much of last year during the rail labor negotiations. So I think that could be part of why we are really looking at Norfolk Southern, why we are looking at these rail companies and their financial statements and decisions over the last few years. So it will be interesting to see how that plays out on the public sphere, and then how that impacts policymaking for sure.
And Rachel, once again, I have to mention an excellent article that you have on FreightWaves.com, and also people can subscribe to your Modes newsletter. Mike, if you want to hear more from you, you also have a show covering some of these topics. How can they do that?
Yeah, so today at 3 Eastern, we're talking to Herman Hackstein, who's the president of the Food and Beverage Rail Shippers Association. So, he's used to dealing with these type of safety issues, moving rail cars on behalf of at least the CPG industry and other food shippers. So I would encourage you to check that out today.
Awesome, guys. Thank you both so much for being on with us today. We'll talk to you soon, and of course, find more of their content up on FreightWaves.com.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Right now, we're going to go over to the wall for our first carrot update of the morning.
Good Thursday morning, everybody. I'm here for our first carrot update. My name is Donnie Gilbert, here with Tanner DeHart. Tanner, you've got some volumes here brought up for us. Seasonality, OTVI.USA. We've got 2020, 2021, 22, and a little bit over there, 2023.
Yeah, so I went ahead and pulled up 4 years of historical looking at outbound tender volume, right? So this isn't necessarily a count of loads, right? We're looking at actual tenders that are being sent out by shippers. Interesting enough, we're slightly above 2020, which is kind of what we expected, but really the first month and a half of the year, we've been completely stalled out. We've got some waiver day by day, but we really haven't made a move up or down. It's been honestly kind of boring the first month and a half of the year so far. Usually you can see 2020 and then also 2021, right about this time, we did get an uptick in outbound tender volume. If you remember, 2 years ago, 21, it was that really bad winter storm that we talked about yesterday that moved across Texas. And then obviously 2020 was COVID, when everybody's kind of rushing the shelves and buying all those cleaning supplies and toilet paper. So we're coming up on that kind of middle end of February. We'll see where it takes us. Let's go ahead and move on to the next chart. Next one is looking at outbound tender rejection, so the percentage of those contracted tenders that are being churned down by the carriers, and we're at a 4-year low here. We're very, very low. 3.33 today. I believe that is a new low on the outbound tender rejection index. Again, we're looking at a 4-year cycle here. 2020, about this time, we were around 4.5%, 5%, and then of course 2021, we were much higher before that COVID. So we're at a 4-year low. if you're a carrier, you're not turning down contracted tenders right now.
You have one section right here that dropped below 3.3, but this is kind of an extraordinary event. This is when our economy shut down. That will never happen again.
Absolutely.
So you can pretty well count that out and call this a historic low. We've never been this low before on rejection rates.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and move on to the next chart here. Next one, we're gonna mix it up. Let's look a little bit about flatbed, right? Flatbed, a little bit more specialty of a mode of transportation. This is the rejection percentage from flatbed carriers. We dipped below, Donnie, the other day, 10%, which for me is a key indicator in the marketplace for what's happening with some softening and tightening, usually historically. We dipped below 10% for just a day and a half. We're right back up to 10.5 today. Flatbed's been an interesting market over the last couple of months.
Why do you see this as being so important and a key indicator?
It tells me about housing. Tells me about manufacturing and housing. As those markets start to change, flatbed starts to soften. That tells me that the economical state of what's happening in the housing market is starting to break.
That's a really good point there. All right. Well, Tanner, good information here. Flatbeds show some bad signs for the economy as well. But right now, we're going to kick it over to Kaylee Nix for our first update on our headlines.
Thanks, guys, for that. Starting off your first check of headlines with some breaking news this morning. Oil giant BP has just announced that it is buying Travel Centers of America for an estimated $86 per share. Pre-pandemic, TA stock was close to $10 per share, so this is a massive price tag for BP. The sale means that the three major U.S. truck stop companies, TA, Love's, and Pilot Flying J, will all be privately owned. Our editor-at-large, John Kingston, is working to find more details on this breaking news. We'll update the story on FreightWaves.com as it develops. The U.S. Senate has started debating how to create a low-carbon fuel standard in the country, and hydrogen fuel cells for trucks was a headline argument. The Environmental and Public Works Committee had its first hearing of the new Congress yesterday, focused on how an aggressive national standard for hydrogen adoption should be. The American Trucking Association president and CEO, Chris Spear, testified that his organization sued over low fuel standards several years ago, saying that tight standards increase diesel prices and make it more difficult. Other experts, including hydrogen producers, however, were bullish on the ability of hydrogen to take a stake in fueling trucks. Ryder System is predicting more moderate profits for the upcoming year, with a decline in used vehicle sales being the main reason for lower expectations. The company posted net earnings per share of $17.04 for its full year 2022, which is a 76% increase year over year, but dropped its expectations for this year's earnings back to $11 per share. The number of used vehicles is not expected to change, but the sale values will drop significantly. And GXO Logistics reported its fourth quarter earnings yesterday, beating analyst estimates for earnings per share by 8 cents. The 83-cent per share price was up 10 cents year over year, with revenue up 9.1% to $2.5 billion. The contract logistics provider posted a $46 million net income, winning new contracts worth about $183.2 million in annual revenue. Most of the wins were driven through e-commerce and reverse logistics, and CEO Malcolm Wilson told analysts that the company is cautiously confident about the upcoming year. You can find details of those stories and so much more up on FreightWaves.com. Give us a like and subscribe if you're watching us live on YouTube, and head on over to tv.freightwaves.com for anything else you might need. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with our first check of weather for the morning, and Ryan Schreiber will join us in just a few minutes. The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
From the truckload quoting page within TieTMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TieTMS can optimize your quoting process.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
And welcome back to FreightWaves Now on your Thursday morning. We've got another round of severe weather marching to the east this morning, impacting folks all the way from central Kentucky down into parts of the deep south. We've got some tornado potential as well as some pretty heavy rainfall and flooding expected for today. It will be quick moving, but pretty impactful across the area. So let's take a look right now in sonar critical events. Right now, we've got just our watches and warnings turned on for the areas, and we can see highlighted in the purple, we've got tornado watches up all the way from western Kentucky up through the western edges of Tennessee and down into northwest Mississippi and eastern Arkansas. So this does include just to the east of the Little Rock area, and this does include all of the Memphis metro. So you've got your interstates running through Memphis, I-40 running east-west, 55 running north-south, and 55 running down into Mississippi, which is included in this tornado watch. The good thing about this is we're going to be seeing a line of storms moving through fairly quickly this morning. So once we hit about noon to 1 o'clock, the tornado threat will end. That threat will end from west to east today. But as that line moves through central Mississippi into Alabama and into central Tennessee, we could see it strengthen and possibly pick up, and we can see more tornado watches issued moving eastward throughout the rest of the day today. Right now, this tornado watch is going to be allowed to expire until 12 o'clock p.m. This is central time for these areas because, as I mentioned, those storms should be well out of the way. But embedded in there, we do have some flash flood warnings. So those areas in red through the Paducah area up towards just to the south of Louisville, really, we have flash flood warnings in place as the rain moving through those storms is very heavy at times. And our rainfall rates are fairly intense. So let's go ahead and turn on the radar here just really quickly. Leading in the front up through Nashville into Clarksville and then up through the western Kentucky area, we've got that heaviest rainfall on the front side. Your tornado threat going to come from this line of storms that's out to the back of this, right in front of that cold front. We'll talk a little bit more about what to expect from these storms as they move to the east today. Right now, though, we're going to toss things over to Isaiah Buchanan. He's got our first check of the social roundabout.
Welcome into Social Roundabout, everyone. I'm Isaiah Buchanan, and coming up next Monday, it's going to be National Love Your Pet Day. And in honor of that, Petable wants to hire a CDFO. That's going to be a Chief Doggy Flick Officer. Now, they have this up on their website right now, and you can earn $1,000 by watching 10 hours of dog-themed movies in a 2-day span. Now, these are movies that are picked by Petable, but the 7 movies are Scooby-Doo, The Fox and the Hound, Hachi, My Dog Skip, Snoopy Come Home, 101 Dalmatians, the animated version, and Wallace and Gromit, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. Now, after you watch all of those 7 movies, they are asking you to write a 1,000-word blog about the movies and how you felt watching them, whether sad, laughed, cried, all the whole spectrum. If you want to apply to be the Chief Doggy Flick Officer, you can do so at petable.com. And speaking of dogs, apparently a dog is Twitter's new CEO. Take a look at what Elon Musk posted on his Twitter page. Look at this goodest boy right there running the business. When Elon took over, there was a lot of controversy about it, but this right here is the man for the job. He is the man for the job. Elon did say that he is planning to hire a new CEO probably towards the end of this year. He wants the company to be in a financially healthy place. Elon took over in October. He put out a poll in December asking if he should step down as Twitter CEO. He said that he would abide by those rules, and 17.5 million people voted in that poll, and they said that the majority of them believe that he should step down, and so he is planning to do so and does plan to hire a new CEO at the end of this year. That's all I have for this edition of the Social Roundabout. Right now, I'm going to toss things over to Kaylee and Anthony.
All right, Isaiah, thank you for that. I do like seeing a dog in Elon's chair. I think that's pretty funny.
And did he say that for that role that you would have to watch 10 movies?
10 movies.
And then
10 hours? 10 hours of movies.
10 hours of movies. Okay, that makes, because that would have been a little bit too long, and I'm thinking that's
$100 an hour, though.
That is still a fair amount.
Take that.
Depending on how long the movies are.
All right, Isaiah, thank you for that update. We'll talk to you a little bit later. Right now, we're going to welcome in our next live guest. We've got Ryan Schreiber joining us, brand new minted Chief Growth Officer at Metaphora. And Ryan, thanks for being here. You've been on the conference circuit a lot already this year, and we've got more coming up. Let's talk everything from Manifest to TIA Capital Ideas Conference that's coming up in about a month. Where have you been around the world with Ryan Schreiber?
First, I just want to say, I'm going to throw this out there. I'm going to drop this bomb, then we can move on. But like, this is cat discrimination. Like, I mean, as like a cat guy, I feel like we need some sort of like, you know, cat movie marathon for $1,000. Anyway, like I've been, you know, I've been at kind of I've been a lot of different places. Ben Gordon Strategic Advisors conference in Palm Beach earlier this year, Stiefel conference last week. Those are both, or I think it was last week. I don't know. It's all running together. Kind of more financially minded conferences. And then you've got things like Manifest that are a little bit more focused on technology and digitization and whatnot. And so it's been a little bit of a gambit here to start the year, along with some client travel. So, you know, it's been some very interesting conversations, and certainly looking forward to TIA Capital Ideas Conference, but also looking forward to not having a conference for a couple of months.
That travel can definitely start to wear on you. And Ryan, when you've seen or heard from all the conferences so far, we're only in February, is there an overarching theme that you're hearing or seeing around the overall industry throughout the first half to second half of the year?
Yeah, there's a number of themes. You know, one is definitely optimism. Like, I was actually relatively surprised at the level of optimism around the rate environment, and kind of the bottom of the rate environment being closer than many people expected. I think typically, in my experience, most of transportation is a pretty reactionary and emotional sort of, if you will, in the way that they react to rates. It's like everything is great and it'll be great for the longest time, or everything is terrible and everyone's going out of business tomorrow and it'll never be any better. And so that was definitely one that was really interesting. And along those lines, people also really focusing still on, you know, how to make better businesses and how to control costs. I was at Lean Mastermind over the weekend. Of course, like Lean is a nearshoring company, and but even at places other than that, people talking about and exploring ways to control costs that they can control. And setting themselves up for really explosive growth on the other side of that.
So Ben Gordon's conference, I'm really interested in chatting about, because obviously it's M&A focused in the supply chain, and we're talking a lot of finance from it. What was something that came out of that you found really fascinating? The M&A space has been, it's semi-quiet, and definitely quiet if you compare it to 2020 and 2021, but it's been a little bit on the quieter side. Could we expect to see that activity pick back up?
Yeah, that's another one of the big takeaways here, is that there's definitely still deals to be done, and people are still very interested in doing deals. I mean, our customers, many of our customers, most of our customers are still aggressively looking to do deals, and actually maybe even expanding the types of deals that they're looking at now. Some of them have absolutely pulled back, don't get me wrong, but definitely, like, there are still deals to be done at the Stiefel conference, which is also very M&A focused. All of the panelists were talking about how they're looking for deals. The challenge in doing deals right now, Kaylee, to your point about deals being slower, seems to just be a valuation issue. Sellers are still sort of seeking valuations that align with what the cost of capital was and what the market looked like 12, 18 months ago, which is obviously kind of not the environment that we're in. So we certainly expect, and our customers certainly expect, that deal flow will pick up. It probably won't return to the way that the blistering pace that it was in 21 and 22, but we're certainly hearing that is very much on the table, and we expect deal flow to pick up substantially, in Q2 and through the end of the year.
And Ryan, keeping on some of that topic and that idea right there, what are the expectations around just almost this talk or continued conversation around this is just a return to normal?
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting comment because everyone is really talking about how it's a return to normal, but at the same time, fundamental structural things have changed within the space, right? I mean, the investments in technology have gone up, driver wages have gone up. Those are some fixed. Those are costs that need to be baked into rates per mile and whatnot. And so while it may be still a return to normal cycle, it may be that rates are still higher than they were in, even 18 when we had a hot market. The base rates, the cost to cover your seat, if you will, are still higher. But definitely the expectation is this is a bit of a return to normals, if you will. And normal is going to be different going forward because there was a lot of talk around reshoring. Friendshoring is a term that people keep using, which I'm still not sure what that means and how it's different than nearshoring. But reshoring, nearshoring, friendshoring, and that's going to fundamentally change supply chains in this country for a while. That is going to be a slow process. And so things will be in flux for a time. And so normal will definitely look different than the way that it has over the last, call it 10 or so years. And people are definitely preparing for that process.
Sticking on that thread of nearshoring and reshoring initiatives going on, there's been a lot of kind of outside conversation about kind of the breakdown of globalization of a supply chain and maybe a move back to regionalization of a supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
See it especially talking with like Noah Mahoney about North American trade, US, Mexico, Canada agreements, really kind of centering that back more on a regional basis. Is that kind of an underlying theme that you're seeing as well? Maybe not necessarily in practical application yet, but just some conversation going on about, okay, maybe we break down the global supply chain and get it more into these regional facets that are a little more stable.
Yeah, this is a conversation that's been going on since the pandemic kind of first set in, right? And I was talking about it, not to call kind of like give myself the credit, but I'm going to give myself the credit anyway. It was one of the early things that I was talking about the pandemic changing, and then with Ever Given, you had people looking at de-risking their supply chain lanes, trade lanes, not even necessarily just the source of their goods. So those two things together are really what's driving this. It's a conversation that's still that's been going on for a bit, but it also is still early stage, right? Global supply chains move very slowly. The biggest thing driving that is infrastructure. You can't just like lift and shift everything that's happening in Southeast Asia and drop it in South America or Africa, or even here domestically, because there's infrastructure considerations that go along with that. There's access to labor considerations that go along with that. And so it's still in the early innings of this transition. And so, Kaylee, very directly onto your point about the regional strategy or whatever whatever you have, that's still kind of to be determined. I think many folks are still trying to figure out what their strategy is going to be, even though we're seeing some early movement on the kind of low-hanging fruit, if you will, of nearshoring or reshoring. So that's definitely a strategy that people are looking at, and obviously it'll be an ongoing thing until we have some sort of critical mass behind certain infrastructure investments in different geographies that'll really power the supply chain in the future.
Ryan, great having you on. As always, if people want to reach out to you or find out a little bit more about Metaphor, how can they do that?
Yeah, hit me up on LinkedIn as always, or on Twitter at _userprime. Thanks for having me, guys. I'll see you next month, I guess.
Yeah, we'll see you next month, Ryan. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back for FreightWaves Now in just a few minutes.
From the truckload quoting page within TieTMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TieTMS can optimize your quoting process.
When guests come to an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we've brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
Hey everybody, this is Thomas Watson, enterprise trucking carrier expert here at FreightWaves, telling you about my show, Loaded and Rolling. Now, it involves trucking topics for large carriers and even small ones that wish to be large. Anything that impacts trucking, you can get it there. You can catch us every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern on tv.freightwaves.com. We do it live.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. My name is Donnie Gilbert. We're here with our second carrier update here with Tanner Dehart. Tanner, you got some diesel fuel prices brought up here. Diesel fuel has been a big issue over really the last several months because prices have spiked to some record highs this year or in the past 12 months. And we've seen it drifting down here over the past few weeks. But what's going on with diesel fuel prices?
Yeah, so actually, I changed the chart. We're actually looking at National Truckload Index. I tricked you up. It's okay. So National Truckload Index, we're looking at spot rates, which fuel does have a really big impact on. So yes, you're saying we had a peak in fuel. That definitely had an impact, as well as truckload demand. So on the spot, as of today, we're looking at about $2.45, which Donnie talked to a few carriers recently over the last week, and they're saying that that's now below their operational cost. What are they going to do?
Yeah, when you take it, see, with spot rates, you know, you really don't do a fuel surcharge. It's an all-in rate normally. So if we were to adjust this for fuel, it would be around, let's say, take out 70 cents. You know, we were here at 165, 160 for an average rate plus fuel, and I remember back in 2004, 2005 talking about $1.55 plus fuel being, around the operational cost. Now, a problem is I worked with Dooner to ask a lot of these carriers or owner-operators what were their break-even costs. And they didn't. I mean, the answers came back all over the board because they really couldn't figure it out. And that's going to be a real big problem for some of these guys. They're going to be running in the red and one day just figure out they don't have any money to buy fuel and they're done.
Absolutely. Let's go ahead and move on to the next chart here. The next one is, we're looking at the same thing, so National Truckload Index, but we're kind of going to zoom in. Now, FreightWaves Sonar has a 28-day rolling forecast, so we're going to be looking at our forecast based on what we see coming in the market. And Donnie, it's really not looking good for the next 28 days. Today, as I mentioned, we're at 245. Our forecast is putting us about 228 over the next 28 days. That's a pretty decent drop.
Between where we are now and within the next month, there's really nothing out there to push, or no holidays, no anything that's really going to help push these spot rates up. It's just it is what it is, and normally this is the time that shippers can kind of take more control of the rates. But we're starting into this with shippers already having a very strong hold on rates. So yeah, they're going to be able to push rates down until capacity just really tightens back up.
Yep, absolutely. And our next carrier update, I've got a few reasons that I think that this is going to drop, so we're definitely going to dive into that and take a look at those. But yeah, it's not looking too great. Like I said, 245 to 229, another 16-cent drop. It's just going to get tougher and tougher on the carriers.
Yeah, so we look forward to your next update. I'd like to see these reasons of why we're seeing all this being pushed down here. But in the meantime, we're going to kick it back over to Kaylee and Anthony for our next segment.
All right, guys, thank you for that carrier update. It's time to welcome in Thomas Wasson, our writer and host of Loaded and Rolling for today's Community Spotlight. Thomas, we should change the name of your Loaded and Rolling to Loaded and Wrapped and Rolling for today's topic, right? Talking all about truck wraps, the benefits, and maybe some of the costs of not keeping up with your graphics.
Wrapping, it's not just for Christmas, it's also for trucks. I have my sponsor on, Lowen and the 3M, the folks who make adhesives and reflective stuff. And very fascinating conversation. It turns out that there's a lot that goes into wrapping these vehicles, and there's quite a bit of science that goes in. The first thing they talked about was how, they figured out a way that you can apply these types of wraps, either permanent or semi-permanent, via force. And you just put it on the side of the vehicle, and then with enough force, the molecules and stuff literally lock in together and secure it. So it was very technical, but super fascinating.
I think this is really interesting because when we're talking about wrapping your trucks properly or not wrapping them properly, that'll do with the life of your truck and your trailer, right? If you get something and your logo starts to fade and you can't unwrap it or rewrap it or fix the wrapping job that you did initially, you just have to scrap your equipment and then invest in new equipment, right? Is that some of the things that we're seeing with some of these carriers?
Well, some of the carriers will, you'll see some like old food trucks with the remains of graphics on them. That's also, if you ever get your vehicle wrapped, I learned, they told me, make sure it's either permanent or not permanent, because some people order it and they didn't mean it to be permanent. And then you're stuck there with like a chisel trying to pick it off if it's not high quality. So that was the first fascinating thing. The second one is, for many companies, if you don't pick the right graphics, your vehicle may have an old logo ending up on a food truck or a local delivery vehicle that's like 20 years past its prime. So a fascinating thing they talked about was how UPS, and this is what I had heard, the reason you don't see many former UPS vehicles in their wrapping is that not only their graphics of better quality, but they'll actually destroy the vehicles or scrap them to make sure you don't see any used UPS style vehicles on the road to protect their brand and their image.
And Thomas, can you talk to some of the safety aspects around wrapping, because that also plays a role, right?
Yes, just like my favorite 3M product, which was the reflective belt when I would run so I wouldn't get hit by anything. You can also make your wraps reflective, which is cool because apparently a lot of times vehicles that aren't reflective, they just get run into. One of the biggest problems for tractor trailers and 18-wheelers is getting rear-ended. You would think that being so large, it would be quite a possible thing to do, but it does happen. So if you're looking at your lettering and your designs, and you want to make sure not only your fleet stands out aesthetically, but from a safety standpoint, they do make these really cool materials that are reflective. And like, say you're predominantly driving at night. What if you're doing overnight runs versus driving during the day? So having that to where you're making a decision like, what does my branding look like? What kind of graphics do I want to show on my fleet? And do I need it to be reflective? Could actually save you claims and money later, just because it's the equivalent of, instead of running with a reflective belt, you're driving with a very large belt of reflective, wraps.
So we're going to move on into our second topic of the day, talking about the TA deal. But before we go there, I want to make one more comment. I think my favorite wrap that I ever see, or my favorite branding on trailers, is definitely the Amazon Prime branding. You know, there's more to Prime, a truckload more. I love that. I think it's clever. I think it works with Amazon Freight, and just kudos to Amazon for that one.
You got to give them props. But how they decide to do their branding and stuff, what started as a humble bookseller has turned into this amazing behemoth. And we always want to wonder, when people wonder why the Amazon effect, we talk with shippers and they say, or we talk with folks like Smart Cargo and they're finding ways to put it under jets. You can thank Amazon for that. One of their biggest challenges is they've told customers, I can get you 2-day shipping. It's not free. You're going to pay for Prime, which offsets some of this cost. But having that expectation is so clever by Amazon, because regular retail pure play channels and stuff, they can't really compete. They're not, logistics. They don't have an AWS web server farm that just prints money so they can offset their businesses. They're just strictly sellers. And so keep an eye out for that. Real fun stuff whenever we look at the Amazon effect.
So, Thomas, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the breaking news that we mentioned earlier. Travel Centers of America being sold to BP for a pretty penny when you're talking about $86 per share. That's a lot of cash. Let's talk a little bit about this from a fleet perspective, from an enterprise fleet perspective. We now have our 3 major travel centers being owned by private companies.
It's super interesting. I think in the press release here, let me get this pulled up, 280 travel center locations. And if you think of the TA, think of TAs and Petros, because TA actually bought Petro. And what's hilarious is you'll find out that they're often right next to each other. Once competitors, now friends. There's literally a TA and a Petro side by side of the same size in Ontario, California. I know my truck stops. I used to have to book them, but fascinating stuff. I literally wake up in the morning, it's going to talk about other stuff. And then I find out that TA Petro is getting bought by BP. Very clever play. There can be lucrative in truck stops once you figure out you can sell parking. The TA Petro platform is actually one of the better ones to book your truck stop, so they figure that out. Love's doesn't even do it. You just show up at Love's and you fight other drivers for the free spots. So fun times with that. But, in the press release, they also had mentioned about how it gets 4 of the 5 growth areas for BP, which is like sustainability, like your electric vehicle space, potential charging, alternative fuels. It's a very clever play going up and down the channels because, you think of BP, British Petroleum, like the wells, you think of the oil distributions or the regular gas stations for BP. But buying the travel centers also opens up other growth patterns in case less trucks become electrified. Now you're going to have maybe a BP charger. So it's really, really forward-thinking, clever play. $86 a share is not bad. I think the actual share price was like 43 to 46. So whoever's hanging on to that thing is going to make a pretty good turnaround.
Yeah, Thomas, and the press release, it said that, in one of the articles that John Kingston just put out, says that there was more than 84% rise from the original price before this offering here. When we're looking at this, do we kind of see BP, in a sense, almost not really bailing out, but really kind of being able to, I would say, capitalize on TA's position, really kind of looking to make a turnaround here?
I think not really turnaround so much as expansion. If you're BP and stuff, you're getting hit by ESG initiatives. You're getting hit by all these other investors, which has had detrimental effects to our own energy security. But it's kind of a regular growth pattern in terms of I'm seeing this stuff up ahead. I don't know what's going to win yet. We always talk about battery electric or hydrogen or natural gas compared to regular diesel fuel. But if you ever want to just shore yourself up, I mean, if I'm paying that much of a premium, I'm buying this thing for $86 a share, like $1.3 billion in billions of dollars in the transaction itself. It's very long thinking, forward thinking comment. And they do, having that also is going to create great revenue opportunities for BP. I'm not as much of an equities analyst, but from my truck stop experiences, generally those locations are the much nicer in terms of how they're ran in their operations. If you end up at a TA or a Petro booking truck stops for drivers, you're in pretty good shape compared to the Pilot website, which randomly crashes sometimes. I hope they finally figured that part out because it literally, I went through a whole period where I had to book exclusively TA Petros as a driver manager because every time I tried it on the Pilot website, it'd crash. So you had to call them up and they said, yeah, I understand. So I digress, but that just gives you an idea of probably why some of the premium is because their operations are pretty good. The locations are clean. They have their own facilities in terms of food and dining. They're kind of a one-stop shop on the road. So if you're looking to expand somewhere, why not have a place that kind of tries to do it all, including maintenance bays and shops?
I will say I do very much enjoy a TA truck stop when I am out on the roads. Thomas, thank you for joining us for this segment. Of course, you've got Loaded and Rolling, the newsletter and the show. Give us a little detail on each.
Well, I guess I'm going to be talking about this TA deal, especially. It's going to be the first one. And then we just have some data here, CAS payment data stuff, and then a few other things. Check it out. Coming out at 2 p.m. It's once a week, so we're not going to be blowing up your inboxes. And if you want to look at the interview about wrapping and lowing, that aired Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. But we have it on tv.freightwaves.com. Check it out. If you want to learn about wrapping, it's a pretty wild ride. Definitely recommend it. I never knew I would learn so much about wrapping, but it's not just for Christmas presents. Let's just say that.
Awesome, Thomas. Thanks so much for joining us this morning, and we'll be sure to tune into that.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break. We'll be back with our next check of weather and another social roundabout in just a few minutes.
Welcome back to another edition of Check Call. Check Call. Check Call. Check Call. Let's go. Nobody works for free, so why should we be expecting our drivers to? Okay, let's just get it together now. What are some of those proactive steps that you can start taking now? For myself, I would like the Earth to still be here for a little bit longer, but you know, is a hot dog a sandwich?
Oh, okay. Is pizza an open-faced sandwich? It's bread.
I have been ready for this question. I've seen the show.
We're all in this together.
Thanks for making me hungry. Now I want a hot dog.
You're welcome. Catch episodes of Check Call Tuesdays at 12:30 on FreightWaves TV. Keep up with all things Check Call on freightwaves.com/checkcall. See you on the internet.
From the truckload quoting page within TIE-TMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TIE-TMS can optimize your quoting process.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for our second check of the weather for your Thursday morning. We're watching a pretty broad area of winter weather move up the backside of this storm, the cold side of this storm, moving all the way through the northern central plains up into the Great Lakes area, bringing some pretty intense snowfall rates and then a razor-thin line of wintry mixed precipitation to the areas. So let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events. We've got the radar turned on right now. We can see we've got that pretty wide area of snow that stretches all the way from the Milwaukee area down through Iowa and into southeastern Nebraska, through the Lincoln area, into the northern parts of Kansas. So we've got winter storm warnings in place just to the north of Kansas City, up through Omaha, Nebraska, into Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, up into Madison and Milwaukee. Chicago right now on that razor-thin edge of the warm to the cold, so they're getting some of that mixed precipitation. This does include some sleet and freezing rain. So we've got an icing threat from Chicago in towards the South Bend area, up towards Detroit and into Toledo. Most of this ice accumulation should be fairly light, but it should be enough just to get a little bit of a glaze on your surfaces, possibly cause some impacts on those roadways. So just be super careful out there fighting the ice. Same thing down into St. Louis. Some remnants of that wintry precip, possibly again some light icing going on there with some freezing rain. We'll see some snow slowly start to drift down to the south-southeast as this storm continues to move through, but most of it should be contained to the north of Oklahoma. So we're going to be seeing winter weather advisories in place for Kansas City, down through the I-70 corridor into the St. Louis area, as well as up further into central Illinois and Indiana. As far as impacts lasting a long time, this will be in and out fairly quickly, looking at it ending by about the evening hours tonight into the start of tomorrow, again, ending from the west to the east there. We'll talk a little bit more about these severe weather impacts coming from this storm coming up later on in our next hour of FreightWaves Now, but right now we're going to toss it back over to Isaiah.
Welcome into Social Roundabout, everyone. I'm Isaiah Buchanan, and this is where we take a look at what's trending on social media. Well, for all my truck drivers out there, you probably remember the first time that you drove solo. You might have been a little nervous being on the road for the first time by yourself in a truck, and now you've probably done it for years, and it's nothing to you anymore. It's easy, simple. This truck driver puts all of those emotions into this video. Take a look.
When you first start truck driving,
All that work out on my own, my very first trip, maiden voyage. All right, here we go. Big old 4-lane, 70-mile-an-hour highway. Let's put this big unit on the big road and see what she's got. All right, deep breath. Holy diesel!
1 year into truck driving,
35 zone? There's literally nothing here. What? This should absolutely be 55. This is ridiculous. Hey, come on. Let's move it, big truck. I ain't got all day. Oh, great. Of course. Another car. Why wouldn't there be?
when you first start.
Now, I'm not a truck driver, but when he was saying there's another vehicle, well, of course there is. Like, I totally relate to that because I feel like when I'm trying to turn out on maybe to a major, like to a highway or anything like that, I feel like the cars are just far enough apart that it makes it impossible for me to pull out and get on the road. So I can totally relate to him in that aspect. That's all I have for this edition of the Social Roundabout. But coming up in my next set, we're going to take a look at a way that you can earn $1,000 by hanging out with some dogs. But right now, I'm going to toss things back over to Kaylee and Anthony.
Nothing more stressful than trying to turn out like across a 4-lane highway when there's just not enough room in between those cars.
Yeah.
Makes me nervous.
Every single time. There should be a better system.
You know what's not stressful?
What's that?
Getting registered for Global Supply Chain Week. It's easy as 1, 2, 3.
That's an easy process, and it's even less stressful to find out that you could be eligible for a giveaway there.
Absolutely. So for re-registration, all you have to do is head on over to live.freightwaves.com. That's step 1. Step 2 is click on the Global Supply Chain Week button. Step 3 is input your information and submit. Boom. 1, 2, 3, and you're in. Chances to win Global Supply Chain Week starts next week on Tuesday. We're going Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 3 days from ocean and maritime to retail and CPG. We've got heavy industry. We've got it all, talking every single piece of the supply chain.
That's right. That's going to be February 21st, 2nd, and 3rd, and you don't want to miss it. And this is a great way to get networking because we're going to have some in-person events not too soon or not too long after that. And so that's going to be a great opportunity to really kind of set the foundation for all the folks that you're going to want to meet and interact with in those in-person events.
Absolutely. Here's our schedule of upcoming virtuals as well. All of those virtual events are free. Save your money and get registered for the Future Supply Chain coming up 4 short months in Cleveland, Ohio. Right now, we're going to take a quick break and catch you up with the last 24 hours in freight and our market update.
When guests come to an event like F3, we know what they want is a chance to show off their products, their swag, and make new partnerships that will last until our next FreightWaves event.
But the problem is there are so many industry events, it can be so hard to find the right one to invest your time and energy in. We at FreightWaves take your investment seriously.
Which is why we brought together thousands of industry professionals in one city over 3 days to showcase all you have to offer.
Because your successful connections at an event like F3 move all of us forward.
Don't believe us?
Join us in June.
From the truckload quoting page within TieTMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TieTMS can optimize your quoting process.
Welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for your 10 a.m. check of top stories this morning. Ryder System is predicting more moderate profits for the upcoming year, with a decline in used vehicle sales being the main reason for lower expectations. The company posted net earnings per share of $17.04 for the full year 2022, which is a 76% increase year over year, but dropped its expectations for this year's earnings back to $11. The number of used vehicles is not expected to change, but the sale values will drop significantly. GXO Logistics reported its fourth quarter earnings yesterday, beating analyst estimates for earnings per share by 8 cents. The 83-cent per share price was up 10 cents year over year, with the revenue up 9.1% to $2.5 billion. The contract logistics provider posted a $46 million net income, winning new contracts worth about $183.2 million in annual revenue. Most of the wins were driven through e-commerce and reverse logistics. CEO Malcolm Wilson told analysts that the company is cautiously confident about the upcoming year. Grocery delivery platform Instacart is fighting to stop the fall of its internal valuation by pushing its services beyond grocery and convenience stores. The company is preparing to launch a service geared specifically at small businesses to deliver items like office supplies and cleaning products, similar to offerings of Walmart and Amazon. There is no launch date slated for the project yet, but it would make sense as it would compete with similar moves made by other competitors DoorDash and Uber Eats. Amazon and Walmart both currently offer small business versions of delivery subscriptions, which let subscribers schedule regular delivery for any type of goods. New trailer orders fell back significantly in January after a big December, but the numbers are more of a return to normal rather than a drop off of a cliff. Manufacturers have plenty of orders in their backlogs, both of trucks and trailers, and orders continue to flow in, according to Great Dane executive Chris Hammond. January bookings hit 24,200 trailers after a record 57,000 in December. Trailer maker Wabash reported a record backlog of $3.4 billion worth of orders at the end of last year. And the Georgia Ports Authority reported a mixed bag of news for its January volumes report, touting a 21% year-over-year increase in exports, but a total cargo throughput decrease of 11.5%. The GPA handled 421,714 TEUs in January, 55,000 less year over year, but still 11% over pre-pandemic volumes seen in 2020. GPA said that weather played a role in the decrease, with 6 vessels slated to call Savannah late in the month pushed to February due to storms. Still, the East Coast is faring better than the West Coast when it comes to container volumes. And you can find details of these headlines and more up on FreightWaves.com or in our FreightWaves app. Give us a follow on social media and like us and subscribe us if you're watching us on YouTube. Head on over to tv.freightwaves.com for everything else. Right now, we're going to toss things back over to Tanner and Donnie for our next carrier update.
Welcome back, everybody. It's just past 10 a.m., which means we're right in line here for our next carrier update. My name is Donnie Gilbert. I'm here with Tanner. Tanner, we were talking about rejection rates in our last session. We're going to carry over here. You got a new map here. Explain what you got brought up here for us.
Yep, absolutely. So the map we're looking at here is there's two parts of this map. The first one's going to be color. So you can see some markets are darker blue, some are light blue, some are even white, right? That's going to represent the rejection rate. So what percentage of freight is being rejected and possibly hitting the spot market. The second version of this map is going to be the height. So some markets are taller than others. And so that's going to tell you where the overall volume is. So putting these two together, right, the tall blue markets are going to be the best markets for carriers to go to.
Darker the blues, higher the rejection rates.
Correct.
Taller the market in shade, the higher the volumes?
Correct.
Got it.
Yep, so some markets that kind of point out to me that have changed recently. One is going to be the Memphis market. Usually a pretty good, hot market, but rejections have stayed steady, but really the volume's changed. So Memphis is looking pretty decent. Also Grand Rapids area towards Wisconsin. Obviously, winter storms are going to start to have a big effect on that. So you might see some color shifts pretty often. And then I know we like to stay away from the Northeast, but sometimes that Pennsylvania market, you can get some pretty good rates coming out of there.
Yeah, so the Pennsylvania market is what I call, it's quicksand. Once you get into that PA market there, there's that band right there that everything seems to deliver into the Northeast, and it's hard to find freight to get out of the Northeast. So once you cross that line, it's like, again, it's quicksand. You're sunk in there, and to get out of the Northeast, you're just going to have to take a very, very low rate.
Yep, you do. Well, let's go ahead and move on to our next chart here, which is going to be the van head haul map. So similar to what you would call like a loaded truck ratio, except it's not that. We are looking at total outbound tenders minus total inbound tenders. So this is going to give you a true view of what the demand to supply ratio is, or count, I guess you could call it, on a map. This is also important to compare to because technically, a market could have a ton of outbound volume, and you might say, well, man, it's got a ton of freight, but if it has just as many carriers, it's not necessarily a great market.
Yeah, if there's just as many trucks coming into that market as there is all these loads going out, then it's going to balance out. But I see Memphis is lit up on here, and apparently these ones that are blue, I guess you could say if it's blue, there's more outbound loads than there are inbound trucks, so it's going to provide a lot more opportunities for these carriers, correct?
Absolutely, and just like you were talking about that quicksand area, Northeast, as soon as you get above Pennsylvania, New York, that whole area is just completely red.
Yeah, the Northeast absorbs more freight than it puts out. So a lot of this freight is brought in through the ports, delivered into, Harrisburg here has the railhead as well. So you just get, and Allentown has a lot of warehousing, so it just seems everything here just moves this way.
Absolutely.
All right, we're going to throw it back over to Tony and Anthony for our next live guest.
All right, guys, thank you for that. We'll get one more carrier update before we're done here for your morning. Right now, we're going to go ahead and welcome in Ann Rinke, president of the TIA, to talk a little bit about what we were talking to John Gallagher about yesterday. That's the FMCSA maybe changing up how they are classifying safe carriers. And thanks for being here, and we love talking to you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So, and jumping into it, great to have you on. What are going to be some of these new changes that we're seeing, and what are going to be the ways that they're going to get identified?
Sure. So, looking at holistically, it looks like FMCSA is trying to streamline some of the kind of fines and penalties and how they're classified. Our members are always happy to have understandable and comprehensive rules. As you know, the public can't see it. This is for the carrier community and for the broker community, but it definitely helps us as we understand what to look for and having it be streamlined. And, there are hundreds of different categories of violations. And so what they're trying to do is put them into blocks. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear this from John Gallagher because I think he said that it's taking it from several thousand down to just a couple hundred violations that will really kind of ease people's decision-making process when they're looking at whether a carrier is safe or not. We'll also provide a little bit of flexibility for a carrier who maybe had a violation and then cleaned up their act, turned around their operations, and have gone 18 months to 2 years now violation-free. We'll kind of help them be more of a viable option to these brokers. I think it's fascinating to look at this from the broker perspective because it does involve a lot of decision making when you're figuring out who you're going to use or not, right? When it comes to how this is going to help out your membership, what do you guys think about that? Is it going to really improve, honestly, the work lives of brokers because now they're not going to have to think so hard about choosing the right carrier?
Look, it's a positive step, but it's not the solution. You know, ultimately what we would need is a carrier rating. And we've talked in the past about a motor carrier safety selection standard. This is some good data, but this doesn't provide the up or down kind of qualifier that we really need as brokers when selecting a carrier. We have, you know, the data about violations, but we don't have the audit referrals. So as you know, there's a requirement for carriers to have a physical audit. 92% of the carriers out there don't have any rating at all because they've never been audited. So while this scoring, the CSA scoring is helpful, it is not determinative. And that's why we continue to push for a motor carrier safety selection standard. The legislation that just was introduced last Friday, HR 915, essentially establishes an interim standard so that the FMCSA can determine over time with a new rulemaking what the right standard, the data that informs that standard should be. It shouldn't be a physical audit, though. They just don't have the resources and they don't have the investigators.
And when we're looking at proposed bad actors from this, who are going to be the bad actors that this is going to be referring to?
Right. Well, so that's a whole complicated issue and one that is, as you know, probably you're hearing a whole lot about, that there is a huge influx of fraud in our industry. And why is that? You know, there's always been elements of fraud. This is not a new thing. But what we are seeing is this uptick of fraudulent actors and criminal enterprises specifically doing things like double brokering or having fraudulent dispatch agents. And so what we're concerned about is the FMCSA believe, again, we know they are resource constrained, but the FMCSA believes because that is a commercial conflict as opposed to a safety conflict, they do not feel like they have the jurisdiction to do much to change it. And so we have carriers who are very, very concerned about this. We have owner operators who are very, very concerned about this. We have brokers, obviously, who are very concerned about this. We have shippers who are obviously very concerned about this. So this is not about safety. Obviously, this is a commercial interest, but it can actually implicate safety if you, because you hand over your load to someone who you think is a reliable and legal entity like a carrier, and it disappears because they're not and they're fraudulent. Well, that seems like that's a safety implication too, that the chain of custody is interrupted. So there are a couple things that we're thinking about. One is, can we come up with the private stakeholders red flags? We have a white paper that we've put out that help our members, but can we view something holistically that helps all the stakeholders? And secondly, part of what we want to see more of is MAP 21 required that brokers have an education requirement, and they have to be have 3 years of expertise. If we actually enforce that, wouldn't that get rid of the sort of fraudulent brokers who don't have any authority and don't have the wherewithal to broker freight illegally?
So I think that that's all super, super important, is that distinction between commercial interest and physical safety when you're talking about that. But as you mentioned, it all plays into it, right? Your chain of custody really does boil down to physical safety as well, because who knows where that freight goes if you genuinely don't know where it goes. I want to touch a little bit on, you mentioned FMCSA not having the bandwidth and not having the resources to completely ensure the safety, which is why a lot of these requirements have been fairly scattered. When we see this carrier classification, the safety classifications being narrowed down and being more streamlined, do you guys anticipate seeing them being streamlined across the state-by-state basis as well? If this is coming from the federal level, does now it streamline violations into a place where your agencies reporting it are all doing it on the same ground level? Therefore, we're in this comprehensive place where there's not a lot of confusion, like X state has these rules and then Y state has these rules, and it makes really for messiness?
Yeah, I think you're right, Kaylee. I think that ultimately having this top-down approach from the federal government makes it so much easier to enforce on the state level. But again, these could be small violations, these could be large violations. This is sort of determinative, but not ultimately dispositive. Like, we're really trying to change the safety paradigm, and I think this is one step towards that. And I think it helps actually make the FMCSA's inspectors' job easier, which is good if you don't have that many. But there's a lot more that we have to do.
A lot more still to do. Do you have any expectations to what we can expect to see in terms of regulations or any kind of changes throughout this year, maybe what you're hopeful for in the next year?
Well, we do know that the FMCSA has a regulatory docket. They say that this rulemaking that I'm talking about, where they determine what kind of data inputs should determine the safety of a carrier, is on their regulatory docket. So I don't know if that means when action happens. Obviously, the regulatory process is very, very slow. On the legislative side, this HR 915, we're going to push as hard and as aggressively as we can to get that in front of every audience we can possibly hope for and get some legislative action on it at the committee.
Definitely something that we're going to be watching closely for sure. And of course, if people want to continue this conversation and reach out to you, how can they do that?
Well, I would love it if they email me at ranky@tianet.org.
Awesome. And thanks so much for being here this morning. Always a pleasure having you on.
Good to see you guys. Thank you.
Good to see you as well. And right now, we're going to head back over to the wall because we have Kaylee Nix with our next weather update.
All right, Anthony, thank you for that. We talked a lot about the cold front moving across the eastern half of the United States right now. So we're going to touch on the cold temperatures trailing behind it. We're going to be seeing cold dipping all the way from the Rockies down into New Mexico, even into south central Texas once again. Not necessarily getting to those dangerous cold levels that we saw a couple weeks ago, but cold enough to really make a difference here. So let's check it out on the map. We've got up our minimum surface temperatures for the next 24 hours. So our coldest temps going to be hitting by about the evening hours tonight into the early parts of your Friday morning. Mountains of Wyoming down into Colorado going to be getting down into the negative 10s, possibly some negative teens in those highest elevations. So because of that, we do have wind chill warnings and wind chill advisories in place across southern Wyoming. That does include that I-80 corridor through Rock Springs and Rawlins, Wyoming, down into the Laramie area, just to the north of Cheyenne. And we're also going to be seeing temperatures dipping pretty cold down into the lower elevations of New Mexico, Albuquerque into those mountains. They're going to be settling right around 0 to single digits. Wind chills going to be getting down into those negative single digits in places. Across Texas, we'll see that cold front bring below freezing temperatures all the way from the Panhandle into the Dallas-Fort Worth metro. Again, these are going to be your low temperatures. So highs for the day is still going to be remaining fairly cold in those mid 40s, but overnight lows going to dip down into the freezing levels. This is going to be behind all of that rain and precipitation moving out. So we're not expecting any winter weather along with that. Further up towards the north, Minnesota into Wisconsin, again, getting some of those single digits into the negative single digits. Wind chills are going to be dipping down there into the negative teens as well. So cold out there for the next few days, and this will last pretty much through the weekend as that wake of the low pressure system really leaves some of that colder air trailing behind it. But by the time that next week starts, we'll get a little bit of a warm up and a little bit of a break before our next winter storm. We'll finish up today's look at weather by talking about those remaining severe weather impacts expected across the southeast today. Right now, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
From the truckload quoting page within TieTMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TieTMS can optimize your quoting process.
Welcome Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
Good Thursday morning, working to On the Spot. My name is Tanner Dehart, joining alongside Zach Strickland. And Zach, today we're going to be looking at some contracted spreads. So recently in the marketplace, as we know, NTI, National Truckload's been dropping. Contracted rates are usually going to follow that for the most part. Today we're looking at about line haul about 174 on the spot, and then about 258 on the contracted market. What's going on with this spread?
Yeah, I mean, it's still extremely large. I mean, when you're talking about the relationship between contract and spot, typically we're looking at about a 5 to 10% discount on the spot market in a normal kind of soft cycle time. Like 2019, for instance, it hovered around that 5 to 7% range where the spot market was below contract. And that's normally because carriers are trying to fill their networks and they get a little bit desperate. So they offer some discounts just to make sure their trucks are moving. Right now, they're getting a significant discount. We're talking, I don't even know what that number is at this point, but it looks like about a 40% discount, 30 to 40% discount off of contract rates. So this means two things. You've got a very desperate carrier base out there, especially on the smaller carrier side who doesn't operate largely with contract. But also you've got a lot of downward pressure on those contract rates. The big surprise, I think, for a lot of people is that the contract market has not really corrected as fast as it was when it was on its way up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, like you said, on the spot, the small carrier has the largest impact. Mm-hmm. But on the contracted side, diesel's also continuing to drop as well. So now even for large carriers, yes, they're receiving that discount because they're buying from the rack price, but that still affects their overall contracted pay.
Yeah, and navigating the fuel market for a small carrier, because you are tied to that retail price, you can't find that discount level, especially since you're trying to compete with some of these larger carriers who can buy on the wholesale or on the rack. So they can discount their rates a little bit more at times than the small fleets. So this is not a great sign for a small operator, small fleet situation where you are buying on the retail side of things, because you just don't have a lot of wiggle room when you're trying to get into that. We've seen inflation also have an impact. If you pulled this chart out, NTIL, all the way back to pre-pandemic times, we're still we've got a lot of room. We've got a decent amount of space to go all the way back there. However, I don't think that would be a great sign if it did fall all the way back because of all those upward inflection points for inflationary costs. A lot of those inputs like maintenance, driver wages, just, your day-to-day operation have increased significantly.
Absolutely. And Zach, I was speaking with one of our shipper customers the other day, and they told me that they just locked in a 2-year RFP. I told them I didn't think that was a great idea, because as soon as the market flipped, they're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, I mean, that's the big concern for a lot of the shippers out there. It's like, yes, things are as easy as it gets right now. We just had the softest Christmas cycle in terms of like tender rejection rates, carrier acceptances. We're at all-time highs for Christmas that, we saw below 6% OTRI. And the spot rates, they jumped up, but that's on a lot lower volume than we had last year. So there's going to be a little bit of that more of a balance towards direct to spot moves, those exception moves versus really that overflow from contract. And what this means is that as these rates continue to fall, these carriers, these operators are going to exit the market because there's just not enough incentive. There's not enough juice in that orange to squeeze out of the market. So carrier exits are going to be a thing this year, especially since these are looking pretty depressed right now. And all that means is that before every one of these upswings, we've had a market like this. And the longer this persists, the more exposed we are to demand shocks like we've seen in the past.
So you think that the change in the marketplace is going to come not from a demand perspective, but it's going to come from a capacity issue, correct?
Well, actually, no. I think we'll see the biggest damage or the biggest pain points, especially from a shipping perspective, from the capacity correction cycle, but demand is going to be the catalyst. That's going to be where it's felt the most. And there's no real reason to think demand is changing significantly in the near term. The economy's still slowing. We've had some relatively positive numbers that I don't know that they're anything groundbreaking, but there's no sign that we're going to see tender volumes or freight volumes start to explode. Consumer demand is still kind of muted, but the longer that we stay in this downtrend with rates, you're going to see these smaller fleets start to just leave. And the longer that happens, the more people leave. And the more people leave, the lower capacity gets. And then if demand does increase significantly or rapidly, then the market goes right back to where we saw it in 2021 with a bunch of rejection rates.
Absolutely. Now, we do have another ticker that does the math for you. So let's go to the next chart. This is going to be the spread between the contracted and the spot rates, right? So we definitely come back down. Our spread got almost up to about 50 cents. We didn't quite get there. Now we're back down to 80 cents where we were, relatively, we hit this level around September, November a few times. What's the key spread number that you're kind of keeping your eye on?
Yeah, I think once this gets down to that 15-cent level, I mean, we're still a long way away. 15 to 20 cent level, I think spread is really kind of the target. I mean, we saw this Christmas impact right here. This is where the spot rates were really increasing due to a lot of that direct to spot that we were talking about, that big mountain peak there. It's coming back down, but it didn't come all the way back down to where it was prior to the holiday. That December 18th level, we're still not there yet. So that's actually a relatively good sign. We need this figure to start to shrink quite a bit because getting back up to, that's where the market normalizes. And that's how we can call the market a bottom. Craig Fuller, our CEO, talks about this all the time. He's like, actually, this is good news when spot rates and contract rates start to come into alignment, because that means there's just not as much wiggle room for carriers to say, oh, I can do this, or shippers to say, I can get a huge discount. There's a financial concern there for both sides. If there's an option for a shipper to get an 80% discount, they almost can't pass it up from a business perspective. Just to the converse of that, when a carrier sees they can get an 80% increase for doing the same work, they have to take a lot of those. So this spread figure needs to come back down, and that's where we really start to see the market normalize.
Yep, absolutely. Or in the chart perspective from a spread, it needs to go back up towards that, right? Go back up in opposite direction. Yeah. So spot markets seem to have a lot bigger influence on this spread than the actual contracted rates do. Now, as we know, we looked at NTI earlier with Donnie. It continues to drop. Let's go ahead and go to the last chart I have here, Zach. And this is interesting. So on Market Dashboard, kind of playing around, looking at some cross-country rates, right? What I pulled up here is the green line is the NTI for, not the NTI, but the lane for LAX to Miami. So Los Angeles to Miami, pretty long lane. And then the blue line is the intermodal rate, so the door-to-door rate per mile. Yeah, the door-to-door rate per mile rate from LAX to Miami. It is now cheaper to ship a truckload over the road from LAX to Miami than it is to put it on the rail.
This is insane. This is insane, and this is actually some pretty strong, Mike Baudendistel talks about this all the time, that if you're looking and you have an option of shipping on the rail versus a truck, rail did not gain market share during the pandemic, as a lot of people just assumed they would while truck rates were elevated. Now we're coming out of a period of time, and truck rates have already corrected to the intermodal level, which means if you're a customer, you are basically not going to have a reason to choose rail at all. Because of all the other nuances that come along with operating on the rail, drayage, port, et cetera. there's still congestion factors there and increased costs. So
absolutely, and good for the rails. I mean, good for the rail companies for keeping their rates up and not dipping along with spot rates, I guess. So awesome. Well, that does it for us here on The Spot. Zach, appreciate you for joining us. We'll be right back after the break.
Hey everybody, this is Thomas Watson, enterprise trucking carrier expert here at FreightWaves, telling you about my show, Loaded and Rolling. Now, it involves trucking topics for large carriers and even small ones that wish to be large. Anything that impacts trucking, you can get it there. You can catch us every Tuesday at 1 p.m. Eastern on tv.freightwaves.com. We do it live.
From the truckload quoting page within TieTMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TieTMS can optimize your quoting process.
And welcome back to FreightWaves Now. It's time for a final check of the weather this morning. We're watching a pretty intense line of storms set up across the eastern parts of Arkansas and the western parts of Tennessee right now, moving into the Memphis area here in just about less than an hour. So let's check it out in Sonar Critical Events. We do have tornado watches up across the areas of the storm. This does include Memphis, up towards the Paducah area into Kentucky, and then out eastward. These tornado watches will continue to be expanded eastward as the day goes along, ending from the west to the east. So behind the line of storms, Little Rock, and then eastward, those tornado watches have been allowed to expire. Memphis, you should be out of the woods here by about noon Central Time. And we're going to be watching that pretty strong line of storms move into the Memphis area here in just about an hour or so. So most of the isolated storms, those isolated supercells, have been absorbed by that line so far. We could see a couple more popping up ahead just to the south of Louisiana, southern Louisiana into Mississippi. But most of what we're going to be seeing today across northern Mississippi into Alabama and here into Freight Alley is going to be that long line of storms stretching in front of the cold front. Your threats here are going to be strong straight line winds as well as sudden heavy rainfall. Tornado threat from this going to be fairly low as we continue to move throughout the day. We're still seeing some, which limits the amount of energy that we get to get those supercell storms. So what we will be watching, though, is for those linear tornadoes, those little ones that spin up and spin down pretty quickly. I'd expect to see your tornado watch extended into the Nashville area here within the next probably 30 to 45 minutes, potentially out all the way to the eastern mountains of Tennessee by the end of the day as well. And this severe weather will be in and out by the evening hours tonight, so your evening commute should be fine if you are eastward of Nashville. We're going to continue to watch this as we move throughout.
Welcome into Social Roundabout, everyone. I'm Isaiah Buchanan. And coming up next Monday, it's going to be National Love Your Pet Day. And in honor of that, Petable wants to help you make $1,000. And you can do that by becoming their Chief Doggy Flick Officer. Yes, their CDFO. Now, for this job, you have to watch 10 dog-related movies within a span of 2 days. Now, these are 7 movies that Petable has picked for people to watch. They include Scooby-Doo, The Fox and the Hound, Hachi, My Dog Skip, Snoopy Come Home, 101 Dalmatians, the animated version, and Wallace and Gromit, The Curse of the Were-Rabbit. Now, once you watch all 10 of those movies, they're gonna ask you to write a 1,000-word blog that will be posted out to their users who can go on and read all about the reviews that you have about all of those movies. And, you know, that's a really cool way to make a quick $1,000. I mean, 10 hours of movies is a lot, but I mean, you can't beat Scooby-Doo, the 2002 version of Scooby-Doo. That one is a classic. I mean, I'd probably stay away from Hachi because I'm not trying to shed a tear, but you know, that's a good list of movies that they have. I want to keep the dog theme going real quick. Apparently, a dog is now the new CEO of Twitter. Elon Musk posted this just a couple days ago, showing a dog in a sweater with the CEO title and said, the new CEO of Twitter is amazing. Now just look at that. That is the goodest boy right there. I mean, he's probably gonna get some stuff done. Twitter's gonna be the most popular social media platform again, all because of this good boy's work. So that's all I have for this edition of the Social Roundabout. We want to know, what dog-related movie would you pick to watch? I mean, there are tons of them out there. Marley and Me, Homeward Bound, Air Bud. Let us know in the comments which movies you think should be in the list that Petable put out. Right now, we're going to take a look at the freight conversation.
Welcome again to our freight conversation, where we continue to talk about the world of freight by continuing the previous conversation and adding it to the next one. I'm your host, Bill Priestley, and joining us today is Andrew Lockwood, Senior Director of Managed Logistics at Southern Global Logistics. Andrew, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Bill, for having me on. Always glad to talk freight and all things logistics.
Glad to have you add your voice to the conversation as well. So we pick up where we left off last week, and we had Ryan Schreiber of Metaphor talk about autonomous vehicles, and here's what he had to say.
I'm going to go back to talking about autonomous vehicles because I don't think that we talk about it enough. I think that often the conversation around autonomous vehicles just centers on sort of extremes of the conversation. Oh, they're going to take everybody's jobs, like it's right around the corner, or it's never going to happen. And so I think there's a middle, right? And I find myself in the middle, which is I'm bullish on it. I think it's really important, and I think we need to figure it out. And also, there are very real challenges to where it is today. So I'd love the next person to start by talking about, what, starting from kind of like a growth mindset perspective of, okay, everything's a problem to solve. Like, what are some of the major problems that we need to solve for right now that can help make meaningful progress on autonomy, not from a technological perspective, because the technology is pretty good, not from a technology perspective, but from a change management perspective. What do we need to do to change people's behavior? How do we change people's behavior? How do we change people's thought process around autonomous vehicles to drive a better, safer environment on the road for the professional drivers, and to protect the professional drivers from four-wheelers who are trying to kill themselves and kill other people. So I'd love to hear somebody talk a little bit more about that, because I think that conversation could use some more attention.
So Andrew, what we have here is an interesting problem, kind of like a storm coming from the distance. It's like, well, some people say, well, it's never going to make it here. We don't have to worry about it. Some people say we need to batten down the hatches because this is going to drastically change the entire freight, certainly the trucking universe. And then you have others that say, well, we actually built the storm and we think it's going to be okay. So what's your take on what he said?
Yeah, I really like this question because the way he kind of framed it is he said, we usually talk about the extremes of autonomous vehicles. It's either about the technology, which we all know is developing and has been developing for the past couple of years. But I kind of likened it to a very pragmatic, approach of, what are the things that's going to
help move this along. I was thinking about this kind of randomly last night of, you think about our cars and just how they've changed. I mean, back in, when we were growing up, right, they had the tape players. No one knows what a tape is anymore, but the tape player, and you had the cigarette lighter, and now everything's evolved to where it's got Apple CarPlay. And so that those changes weren't overnight. Like there were small little evolutions in each model or year iteration of each vehicle, and that kind of got us to where we are now. But I think the same is going to be true in our industry. There's those that are going to say, oh yeah, it's next year, like the technology is there, and for sure the technology is always kind of out front by a couple years. But I think about, what's it going to take to really get it going, and it's a very similar conversation with Tesla and some of the other other things that are going on in the car industry, where you've got the technology with the autonomy is there. It's just working through the change management. And the biggest thing is safety on the highways, right? I mean, anytime you have the one or two cases where somebody gets hit and killed and you've got lawyers involved, it just gets messy. And so, one thing, and again, I love the state of Florida because we have some good roads down here where there are great test cases. But I'm a big advocate for, I talked at length with Kevin Hill about this 2 years ago, turnpike tandems. It's kind of a little known fact, but between Orlando and Miami, you can run 2 48-foot trailers. And so there's these weird loopholes sometimes, and it's state by state, but that's essentially a 2-for-1 with a truck. The problem is, and really the constraints are, you can't go more than, I think it was 5 or 10 miles off the highway. So you are very constrained to just the Florida Turnpike. But man, that would be an amazing test ground to get this launched. And I think that's all you need is you need one good use case to say, you know what, look at all the benefits. You need a large shipper that's got volume going, maybe in both directions, where they could really use something like that every day. The great part about autonomous trucks, right, they're not limited to 11 driving hours and 14 on the clock. No, they can go continuously. So you're essentially doubling your capacity anytime you do a 1-for-1 swap, driver behind a vehicle versus autonomous truck. So I think that's where it's going to start. It has to start at the state level. Larger shipper who wants their name in the news and to maybe get some credibility behind this. But the Turnpike's it's mostly 2 lanes. Like there's not a whole bunch between Orlando and Miami. It's really a great test ground. We see the reports in the news, Bill, of this company, this startup's doing this and that. But I think to get it off the ground, it's got to be done within one state first. You've got to build some trust within the public realm, and then that's where, when you start getting states to work together at a federal level, that's where it'll happen.
So you have the ear of the entire freight audience. Let's say you have the podium. Where do you want to see the conversation go, Andrew Lockwood?
Yeah, so specifically, if I were the transportation secretary for one day, and whoever's coming next, what I would want them to answer is, look, let's say, Pete's out for the day, and you're the transportation secretary, and you want to drive forward kind of a very pragmatic plan for spending all this money, in the years forward. Like, how would you do it? And specifically, like, I would go to 2 areas that we've kind of highlighted during the conversation, like specifically truck parking and then the inefficiencies at the warehouse. And so if we know that that's plaguing the trucking industry right now, I think about, like, could we offer incentives to warehouses that turn drivers within 30 minutes instead of 3 hours? Like, is that worth incenting shippers or warehouses or 3PLs? Like, is the money best spent there so that the drivers are back on the road? Is the money best spent, building more truck parking lots, especially knowing that autonomous hubs are coming down the road? Can you kill 2 birds with 1 stone? What's the best way to spend all this money? Because I think we acknowledge the issues of the industry. To me, those are, again, the very top 2. But I don't know. I'm interested in those thoughts of whomever's coming after me, of like, how would you best spend this pot of money?
You have given someone a lot to think about.
Exactly.
For sure. All right, Andrew Lockwood, thanks so much for joining us on our Freight Conversation.
Thank you, Bill.
You can hear the entire conversation with Andrew Lockwood on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/FreightWaves. Andrew goes into all aspects of autonomy, including how we will achieve it and what might be coming next once autonomy becomes normal in trucking. That's the Freight Conversation with Andrew Lockwood, available on youtube.com/FreightWaves Now. We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back to wrap up your show.
The 2023 Freight Tech 25 list is filled with meaningful innovators from across the industry who are helping shape what the future of supply chain will look like. Check out the full list of these companies and all the latest Freight Tech news at FreightWaves.com.
From the truckload quoting page within TieTMS, you can create a new shipment to instantly display your historical lane average alongside all of the market-leading rating intelligence tools. In just a few clicks, you can adjust the quote, add your margin, select your quote response template, and email an official quote right off to the customer from the same page. Request a demo today at tie-software.com to find out how TieTMS can optimize your quoting process.
Welcome to Drilling Deep. I'm your host, John Kingston. Drilling Deep is the place where we talk about oil and we talk about diesel, and you have to drill to get oil and you have to get oil to make diesel, so that's why we call it Drilling Deep. Drilling Deep drops every Friday on FreightWaves TV and all available podcast platforms.
Welcome back. It's time for one final check of your top stories this morning on FreightWaves.com. New trailer orders fell back significantly in January after a big December, but the numbers are more of a return to normal rather than a drop off of a cliff. Manufacturers have plenty of orders in their backlogs, both of trucks and trailers, and orders continue to flow in, according to Great Dane executive Chris Hammond. January bookings hit 24,200 trailers after a record 57,000 in December. And trailer maker Wabash reported a record backlog of $3.4 billion worth of orders at the end of last year. The Georgia Ports Authority reported a mixed bag of news for its January volumes report, touting a 21% year-over-year increase in exports, but a total cargo throughput decrease of 11.5%. The GPA handled 421,714 TEUs in January, 55,000 less year-over-year, but still 11% over pre-pandemic volumes in 2020. GPA said that weather played a role in the decrease, with 6 vessels slated to call Savannah late in the month, pushed to February due to storms. Still, the East Coast is faring better than the West Coast when it comes to container volumes. And APM Terminals Mobile has begun a $60 million rail expansion project that will double the capacity for customers at the Port of Mobile, Alabama. The terminal will add 12,000 feet of tracks as well as additional rail yard storage space to improve access to the Port of Mobile. The project should take about 24 months to complete and will double capacity of the Port of Mobile to over 1 million TEUs by 2025. And you can find these stories and so much more up on FreightWaves.com or by logging onto our FreightWaves app. If you're watching us on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. And for the full FreightWaves experience, head on over to tv.freightwaves.com. We're going to toss things back over to Tanner and Donnie for our final carrier update.
Welcome to our final carrier update for this Thursday. Now, typically we would go in and do a Lanes of the Day episode, and I typically pick out some lanes. Well, today I chose Laredo, but we're not going to show you Laredo. Typically, if you like $2 a mile long haul freight, then check out Laredo. So we're going to skip over there. We're going to skip it today, and we're going to start with the inbound ocean shipment index here with Tanner. Tanner, tell us about this index. Tell us what you know.
Absolutely. So, Donna, we talked about this, I think, Monday or Tuesday, and carrier update a little bit earlier this morning. We talked about the NTI forecast dropping. So I wanted to pull up this chart. As we all know, we talked about 100 times, right? Since May, inbound TEUs have dropped significantly. Basically, beginning of this year, end of last year, we've been stagnant. But the thing that surprises me is that there was no really big buildup to Chinese New Year in December. So you can see this major drop off right before February in the inbound TEUs. Now, here's what worries me about this. May, all the way back up to 2023, there was a buildup of ships at the ports, right? Yes. There was 80, 90, 100 ships built up. So this drop in demand was fine because it gave them time to catch up because there was so much. Well, now there's 0 boats waiting at the ports, right? LAX and Long Beach this morning had like literally 0. So my worry is that this is going to affect us because it takes around, 30 to 45 days, Johnny, you would say, for this order to hit the ports?
Yes.
That huge drop-off the beginning of December, that's going to hit the ports pretty hard, and that converts to truckload. So I think this is pretty worrisome. I think that's why you can see the NTI forecast start to drop, because as soon as these orders and ships start to hit the ports, that demand's going to completely drop off a cliff.
Yeah, this lack of demand, I think right now the average time you can see in our container atlas is 25 days, I believe it's what it's down to. And that's, or maybe it's 35 days. And it's because instead of the boats coming directly across the ocean full, they're now probably going down some port to port and picking up more freight because they're not full leaving China. So it may take a little bit longer for them going port to port across the ocean, where I believe during COVID, it was actually down to 25 days because there were more direct ships. But yes, this is going to hit. So this will hit probably sometime in the beginning of March. And that demand in the LAX market is going to drop for these guys that are running drayage. And it's also going to hurt the rail as well. And of course, that rail is going to trickle down to Atlanta, Chicago, Harrisburg as well. So it's going to be a tough month starting out in March, I believe.
It is. I agree with you. Let's go ahead and look at the next chart, which is this is the CSTM, or the U.S. Customs import shipments. This is the number of BOLs, right, that are coming into the United States at every single port. Same thing from June. You can see we're up in kind of like the 55, 65,000 range. We've dropped all the way now into 47,000. By the time those boats hit and those ships hit in early March, you're looking at probably drop to 40.
Yeah, so we're already down, looks like 15% and probably another 15% plus. So, and the leading indicator right now for the U.S. economy normally is what's going on in the maritime industry. So hopefully we will see these turn around and pick back up soon. And that will be a good leading indicator of demand for capacity starting to tighten as well.
Absolutely. Quickly, next to the last chart here, to talk about Chinese New Year, you can see that the blue line is that outbound shipping index, and the green is that truckload that's outbound from LAX. So every time we've had a dip in the amount of TEUs that are coming in from Shanghai or coming in from China, we've had a dip in that outbound truckload volume.
As well, I can see that. So our data does correlate. That's very good. This is what you need to watch for the turnaround as well. When you see these numbers start to flip around, we know what's going on. We're going to throw back up here to Kaylee, Nix, and Anthony for the end of our day. Thank you.
Thanks, Donnie, and Tanner. All right, we are done here for your Thursday, which means, Anthony, we're one step closer to the weekend, but you still have another full day of FreightWaves content to get through. About an hour until Freightonomics?
That's right, the countdown begins. We have Freightonomics coming in just about an hour. We heard from Zach Strickland not too long ago. You hear from me all the time. So we get to team up again after a week away. Tony Mulvey filled in for me last week, but we'll be back again in about an hour. We also have Refuel coming up a little bit later on, and we have Higher Road.
Absolutely, and People Speaking Real will be this afternoon as well, so make sure that you're staying tuned in. If you want to take a break from our content, well, that's fine, but head on over to live.freightwaves.com and get registered for Global Supply Chain Week. week coming up in less than 5 days. Next Tuesday, we get started with our Maritime Day. That is the 21st. We've got CPG and rail. We've got automotive and heavy industry. Free to register and many benefits from hanging out with us there for those 3 days. We'll see you guys tomorrow morning starting live at 9. Have a good Thursday.
What the Truck is now 3 days a week.
FreightWaves is the #1 source for transportation and logistics news. FreightWaves.com provides you with in-depth news coverage, data, and insights from the leading industry journals.